Thank you, all the members for joining in today. Thank you, Snehal Kamdar sir, for accepting our invitation for today's VCM. Before starting with the VCM, I would like to give an introduction for Snehal Kamdar sir. He's a senior partner in Messrs. Jain Jagawat Kamdar and Company Chartered Accountants. Sir has been around a part of around 30 transaction of IBC in various capacities. Debt of companies handled as IRP to the tune of 2000 crores. So have been associated with the SME segment and with the associated merchant bankers, have been instrumental in bringing more than 20 SME IPO. Sir has also syndicated debt of more than 1000 crore in last decade. He's a founder member and acting managing trustee of IP Foundation, NGO working for creating awareness on IBC to various stakeholders. Mrs. Jain Jagawat Kamdar and Company is a firm in which he is a senior partner, which is empaneled with IBA, SBA, SBI, EOW for forensic audits. Uh, the firm is also empaneled with BSE for valuation of shares. He is appointed as professional expert director in one of the cooperative banks. He is a member of insolvency and bankruptcy committee of WIRC. He has been a regular speaker at ICI and other forums on insolvency, valuation, and other related topics. He's a member of task force of IMC Insolvency and was a past convener of Chembur Andheri West CP Study Circle of WIRC. He's also the mentor at Thakur Incubation Center for the Startups. He's an advisor to the board of private limited company, a company incorporated in 2004 and working as an enforcement agent under SURF-SI Act 2002. He has been a regular contributor on blog at www.snailkamdar.in. He has contributed in a book published by ICI on judicial pronouncement under IBC and also contributed to Thought Mailer at BCAS. He is also a co-authored book reference guide for insolvency professional published by IP Foundation. He is a part of research committee of ICAI IPA. With this great experience and knowledge, I request Snehal Kamdar sir to take over and start with the VCM. Sir. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you, Chembur Study Circle, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this subject. So today, the topic that I have been asked to speak is the understanding IBC and the opportunities for chartered accountants under IBC. So we'll be focusing on our talk on the insolvency and bankruptcy code and various opportunities that are available for a chartered accountant under this code. So first and foremost, under IBC, I would like to share that the chartered accountants are the one who has a 10 years of membership eligible to become a resolution professional and act as a resolution professional. So that is to start with a foremost thing that if you are planning to diversify yourself, if you are planning to act as a resolution professional, then yes, this is opportunity provided you have completed 10 years of your membership. You have a 10 years of membership with our CA Institute. So the people who are eligible are the CA, cost accountant, advocate with 10 years of membership of the institute, of their institute, and a management consultant with 15 years of experience. So these are the people who can appear for an exam, that is a limited insolvency exam, clear that exam, and then do 50 hours training. That is a pre-registration course that has to be done by IP who has cleared the exam, and thereafter they will get a certificate of practice, what we say AFA in the under insolvency. AFA is nothing but a certificate of practice like what we have in CA. So appearing for exam modules are a little bit different. The exam is MCQ based exam, which in past probably in our CA curriculum or during our CA period we may not have Done. So it's a MCQ question with 4 options. Choose the correct option, and wrong answers 0.25%, 25 marks deduction. Passing mark 60. This is the way the exam, and it's an online exam that is conducted by NSE ITs at NSE IT centers by IBBI. IBBI is the board that is created to control this profession. So the overall to become a IT, the eligibility criteria I have shared with you. Now let's in today's discussion we will try to speak more other than a resolution professional. If you are a practicing chartered accountant and you would like to have an area added to your profile where you are providing additional services to the resolution professional to various clients, and basically, so what are that kind of services that you will be able to provide? So coming back on the topic, a chartered accountant. So when we talk of a chartered accountant, what do we understand by a chartered accountant, a practicing chartered accountant? Would anyone like to say something on what will be what do you mean by a practicing chartered accountant? What does the practicing chartered accountant do? Any participant would like to share their thought on what do a practicing chartered do? No one? Okay. So this is first characteristics of chartered accountant, that they are too shy to express themselves. So whenever the question is posed, obviously this happens very quite often when the audience is chartered accountant. So yes, so a chartered accountant in practice practices in the area which is on accountancy, finance, and taxation is what is understood at large. They are considered as a tax expert. They are considered as a accountant, one who has a expertise in accounting, where the accounting standards and the things are very auditing standards they are well versed with. And in finance, they have excellent knowledge on the financing part also. So a working capital cycle and a debt cycle of any company, they are able to understand, and they are able to make the cash flows and MIS for the companies. So these are the positions where a chartered accountant is always deemed fit for and is taken. In this, whom do we compete? So practically, a chartered accountant can be competed by only another chartered accountant, in my view, because there cannot be any other living being, not human being, who will have a aptitude of a chartered accountant or a knowledge base of a chartered accountant. Nevertheless, over a period, what is seen that we chartered accountants who are into practice basically more on SMPs, we have started our practices more on the focused on the compliance practices. When you talk of compliance practices, TDS compliance is filing of returns, GST compliance is filing of returns. When you do enter into an area of compliance practice, in compliance practice, what is required is a data entry operator with a basic knowledge of the subject. So there we have a competition from a non-chartered, and that's where the revenue of a chartered accountant get diminished. You actually see your revenue getting shrink, your overheads getting increased because you are entered into a compliance practice. What are the area of practice of a chartered accountant where he will be highly remunerated? Okay, the area where he showcases his expertise and he pushes himself above others in the area of practice that he is or she is the highly remunerative area for a chartered accountant. One of that practice area is a litigation practice. A litigation practice by a chartered accountant for in taxes, maybe direct tax, indirect tax, is always remunerative, because litigation is the area where two people fight and the one who helps them to fight always makes money. Whether the other two who fights do win or make money is a question that gets answered at the end of the debate only, fight only. But throughout that tenure, the one who helps in the litigation is always remunerated well. So a litigation practice is a practice where a chartered accountant should enter and should look into overall for down the line for the if they are looking for a growth module in their firm or in their career. So now IBC, what is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code? And this code came into 2000. It was enacted in 2016 and implemented by start of 2017. So who were the people who were controlling this insolvency profession before this code came? After this code came, a separate set of professional came into picture, a resolution professional. As I said, the chartered accountant, cost accountant who have 10 years of practice, 10 years of membership, cleared the exam and has they practice as an insolvency professional. Before this, 2017, when it was implemented, who used to practice in insolvency? So in insolvency, in past, this was a predominant area of practice of lawyers. Lawyers used to practice insolvency matters, and they used to file the applications in the High Court. And it was a matter where if you have a winding up petition or an insolvency application, then it cannot be done without a lawyer. Now, when it comes to a lawyer, let's understand what I have learned in this last from 2017. I was early entrant into IBC, and what I have learned in this area is one of the major thing I learned is during my I will share an experience to give you an insight on this. During my early days of this practice, when I started, we need to have built a team. So in the team of an insolvency professional, a must is a lawyer. Without a lawyer, if you start this insolvency practice, it is very challenging at times. So I had a friend of mine, a school friend of mine, who is a solicitor, basically. So when I asked him that, Amar, let's start into this together after a school time, we were looking forward to work together. But now this is an opportunity. So he said, first of all, you come to my office for half a day, and then let's think how to go ahead. So I went to his office. He made me sit in his cabin, and he said, look how I attend my clients for half a day, and thereafter we will discuss the things. So he attended, I had reached at his office at 10 a.m. in the morning till 12. He attended approximately 10 clients of his, and in 2 hours time. And at the end of that, he questioned me one thing. Snell, what did you understand? I said, I thought you were a very knowledgeable and intelligent person, but I find you as a fool. You don't know the basics also. So he started laughing at me and he said, this is what I wanted you to understand first. As a chartered accountant, I have been to your office many times, and you always, when I share the query, you always bounce on the query and were ready to answer the query without a second thought. And once you answer, the most of the time, your client or anyone would answer you that, yes, sir, ye to mere ko malum tha. I knew this, anything different. And thereafter, once they say that they knew the answer to what their query was, you cannot bill them. But as a lawyer in our office, what I did, I patiently heard them out. I knew the answers. I could have given them the answers, but I said, keep the file and come back tomorrow, or my people will get back to you tomorrow. Vis-a-vis, as soon as he went outside, there is a secretary sitting outside my cabin. She would have invoiced that client for the time spent in my cabin. In that time would have also included the time he took to drink the tea that he came to he had in my cabin. And we bill for time basis, which you charters don't bill. Second, he gave me an insight that As a chartered accountant, you are ready to come out with the knowledge sharing in your office also, that lawyers doesn't do, because they bill for this knowledge what they have gained, which you charters don't do. This was a great learning that I had from my friend when I told him, let's start it, practice together into insolvency, and I would require support. He said that if you are ready for this change in mind at your end, then yes, I'm ready to work with you and enter into IBC practice with you. But if you still want to show that you are knowledgeable and you want to share everything to your client upfront and don't bill him, I am not interested. I do two things on the platform of knowledge sharing where I'm called as a speaker. I share knowledge freely. But when it comes to my cabin, someone coming for advisory, I don't do any free advisory, no charitable activity. So to all my chartered friends, this was a great learning that I had from my IBC thing, that we chartered accountants are much more knowledgeable than many of the other reputed professionals, where our knowledge base is high, but we have not been able to encash on our knowledge because of the way we work and the way we look at the transaction. We always are have over a period. I have seen that the line between the professional work and the relationship that we maintain with the client is a very narrow line, where we have more entered into a friendly relation with most of the clients, and that's where we are losing on the revenue. So friends, on the IBC front, my learning, I'm sharing that when we do the work at our office, let's start working on time basis. Whatever time we are devoting for the client, whether it is a nuisance, whether it is a chargeable work or non-chargeable work, we should charge for every time spent on the client. So this is one of the learning which I normally start with in my all opportunity sharing sessions, because more than the opportunity you are losing on the revenue you are sitting on. Let's first encash that, then look for a new opportunities. Coming back to the IBC, insolvency is an area where the huge opportunity lies. I had identified 23 opportunities under Insolvency Act for a chartered accountant. That we will take one by one. We will discuss IBC also simultaneously under IBC at that which point there is opportunity and what type of opportunity lies, and how that opportunity which is there can be encashed by a chartered accountant who would like to enter into this area of practice. Okay, so let's understand what does the code says and where the code gets applicable. So at this point of time, the code will envisage insolvency for a corporate LLP, that is a limited company, private limited company, LLP, partnership, individual. These are the four categories which are envisaged under insolvency code, which to which this code will apply. Out of these four, first two category, corporate, that is private limited, limited companies, and LLP, have been notified and are into working since 2017. Of late, under individual, only one personal guarantors who have given a personal guarantee to a corporate debtor has been notified. Partnership firm and individual are yet to be notified. So we will not discuss today anything into that partnership and individual. We will discuss opportunities that lies and the code on the aspect of corporate LLP and the personal guarantors things. Okay, so now coming to what does the code says. So code says that there is any company, a corporate debtor, who has defaulted in making its payment for any supply of goods or services, okay, as well as defaulted in payment of any loans, the code would be applicable. Now, when you talk of supply and goods and service, the code says that the person who supply goods and services is an operational creditor. And when we talk of a loan, the one who gives is a loan is a financial creditor. So we will be using the word operational creditor and financial creditor in while during this session to understand the code. What is the default? So default, initially when the code was notified, the limit of default was 1 lakh rupees, which has been enhanced in March 2020 to 1 crore rupees. So if there is a default of 1 crore, as on now it is 1 crore. If there is a default of 1 crore rupees towards supply of goods and services, yes, that is the operational creditor can go and file application in NCLT under section 9. If there is a default of loan, then the financial creditor can go and file application under section 7 under the code. And there is another section, section 10 under the code, which says that the company, the corporate debtor themselves feels that they will not be able to turn around the company from the mess that is there, and they would like to go under insolvency, then under section 10 suo motu they can apply. Now here lies the first opportunity. We as a chartered accountant, when we do audit, okay, under the balance sheet, under the current assets, we have an item known as sundry debtor. And in the balance sheet annexure, we identify data which are considered good, data which are not considered bad. Then we identify aging analysis of the data more than 6 months, less than 6 months. When you do this exercise while the auditing, and when you identify that there is a data in the balance sheet of a company where you are an auditor, and the data that is 1 crore and more, and he has defaulted. So when you say he has defaulted, so there is a contractual when the invoice is raised, invoice has mentioned the payment terms to be made within 30 days. Till 31st day, payment has not received. That means it has defaulted. There may be a market practice that the payment to be made every fortnightly if the due date is missed, but that in the law does not stand correct. So, and no trade practices will have a say in this. What does the document say will have a say in the code. So if there is a contractual agreement for providing services and the date is defined, that date, once it is lapsed and the payment has not been made, it is considered as default. Okay, so you have to connect your client and discuss with them ki this is 1 crore default of this corporate. Why don't you try and pull them to NCLT? Always remember, we chartered accountants have been considered by the client as a cost center, and that's where our remuneration, whenever we ask to increase, there is always crying on the client side that we don't add revenue. Here, by advising the client on the data to be pulled to NCLT, whereby their cash flow may improve, their liquidity may improve, their balance sheet may improve. There is a value addition to the services that you are doing. And for this service, the client will always be happy to pay you more because you are assisting him in recovering his doubtful debts. So first point that I share, that I would tell is identifying from the balance sheet and advising the client on the mechanism to recover the stuck data through NCLT. This paves a way for another area of practice is preparing the application that it needs to be filed and the correspondence that needs to be done with that data for filing of application. So another area, once you start this area, now you understand that you are entering the shoe of a lawyer. So when you are entering the shoe of a lawyer, your payment terms also should enter the shoe of a lawyer. Lawyers don't work on future payments. They work on advance payment. You may be amazed to know that most of the counsel who appear in the tribunals and court, unless they are paid, they don't attend the hearing whatsoever may be crucial hearing. If the payment is not done, they may reach the courtroom, and by the time the number comes, if the payment is not credited in their account, they will just walk out of the room, and the ex parte order can also happen. This is the way lawyer performs. This is the professionalism that they have. When I share these things in my other lectures, someone came up with a thing that, sir, this is very unprofessional. I said, no, this is not unprofessional. This is highly professional. There is a gap between unprofessional. Unprofessional means you don't come prepared and you don't do your work properly. What it is considered as highly professional because the party who had appointed you to do the professional work has failed in his duty to perform his task of making a payment on due time. You actually walked out of the case. That makes you a highly professional person. So let's understand same thing. From one angle, it is unprofessional. From another angle, it is highly professional. You have to judge yourself and you have to look forward into this practice area. I always share this thing that let's see from a highly professional area, because once we value ourselves, others will start valuing ourselves and our services. So area of practice, helping the client first to identify the sticky data and the structure to recover it. Second, helping them to prepare the application that is to be made to NCLT and correspondence that is to be made with the data where the money has got stuck off your client will fetch you a good thing. The third area that comes together with this is once you file this, there will be hearing in the courtroom that will happen. It's a tribunal. So as a chartered accountant, we chartered accountants have a right to represent in any of the tribunal. It is not only NCLT where IBC cases are, even if it is a green tribunal, you have a right to appear in green tribunal. So whichever tribunals are there, identify all the tribunals that are already there, select a tribunal where you would like to practice yourselves and prepare yourself for that area of practice, a very big area of practice and very remunerative area of practice and very challenging area also, because representing in tribunals has a lot of things to be learned before you enter into that practice area. It is not the only knowledge that will come to your rescue when you do a representation practice in front of the benches. Okay, so what are the things that you need to know before you do this representation practice in tribunal? The code of conduct. The code of conduct to represent in the thing. Today, while delivering lecture, I'm wearing a t-shirt. But when I have to appear in tribunal, I cannot go in such informal wear. I have to be formally dressed. Okay, so there are etiquettes that you need to follow, a code that you need to follow, how to address the bench member. You know, Mr. X is the judiciary member and Mr. Y is the technical member on the bench. You cannot address them. Yes, Mr. Y, I would like to share my thoughts to you. So he is a judge. So you have to address by way of your lordship or a similar salute to them and then address them. While speaking to them, a certain way or methodology needs to be followed. So this representation practice requires not only knowledge of that law under which the tribunal is formed and the sharing of that knowledge to the judges, but the art to present yourself in front of this bench and present your case in front of the bench. There are general etiquettes that needs to be followed, that if you are appearing and that is for the applicant, for the respondent also, that someone would be appearing, both will have their own time. You don't have to cut the talk of the other party. You will be given your time to present his case. The other counterpart will get his time to present his case. So the small things that in this practice you need to learn. You need to know that the application that you made may be of 1,000 pages, but you require only will get 3 minutes to present yourself that 1,000-page application in front of the bench. And in that 3 minutes, you have to cover the crux that you want, the direction that you want from the bench. So this is the small things in nutshell that I share in with respect to representation practice. This representation practice in IBC has a huge opportunity. I have myself appear in NCLT since 2017. I have been regularly appearing in front of Bombay bench, and I have seen that the level of knowledge we have and the level of analytical capability as a chartered accountant what we have, uh, seniors lawyers also may not have that capability, but that senior counsel who appear, they have that tact, they have an art of representing. So when you are looking forward into this practice, just learn how to communicate in that 3 minutes, that 1,000 pages, and you are the winner. I have been regularly appearing. I have been called many a times in the chamber by the bench member also. So I have been discussing with them. So what I have made to understand that the chartered accountants does not appear regularly, but all the applications that comes to the bench are normally prepared by chartered accountants and the lawyer are representing. So a chartered accountant should start representing also, because it's a area which is highly remunerative. I underline, because in today's time we are looking for a area where remuneration is high and our capability as a chartered accountant is used. We have been using our capability for a lower profile work than what we have to do. This is the area where a capability of chartered. So we as a chartered accountant now, the practice area, as I said, is the representation. Now, what happens in insolvency? You have identified the data of the balance sheet. You have communicated to him. You have filed an application because he has not reverted back or paid back the money. The matter goes to NCLT. You argued the matter in front of the bench, and the order is pronounced in favor of your client. That is the order against that corporate debtor. Admission of insolvency has been done. So in the admission, the things that order state is appointment of an insolvency professional who would take over the management of that data. This is the biggest danger, because of which most of the time when you just send the application that we are filing this application to NCLT, most of the time the other side party who is, if they are aware what is insolvency code, will come down to your table and negotiate. So another area of practice, mediation and conciliation practice, practice of a where a chartered accountant can help their client to negotiate and recover that money through by filing of a consent term in the court, or by entering to a final consent deed, which will be implemented whereby the payment which is stuck can be released without going further into litigation. So before admission, if you can get the other side convinced of the payment by showing him the danger that he will, if the company gets admitted, the management of that company will get suspended. IP will come, insolvency professional will come, will take a charge of the company and control of the company, whereby the everything from signing of checks to entering to any agreements cannot be done by the promoters or the board. It will be done by insolvency professional. This is a big threat to that company, and because of which normally they settle. So I have been looking into this practice. I have almost solved more than 50 cases in last 3 years, which are sorted out before admission, where we as a chartered accountant can play a big role. Like I negotiated, I made the client understand that, okay, your outstanding is what, 10 crores from this party. He is ready to make this payment in 4 installment. Let's take it. Because if the matter gets admitted as an operational creditor, you rank much below, and probably you may not be able to recover even what he is offering now. So working on how much the recovery can happen if it goes under insolvency, and showcasing to the client and telling him that due to this fear he is giving you this money, let's take it, and anytime we have an option again to go back if it defaults in his payment. So advisory on these lines also helps. The fees that is being charged is on the normally some percentage equivalent to the recovery that the client makes. The market, if you ask me, 20% of the recovery is what the recovery agencies are charging. This is what the revenue that you can see. So if you are able to recover 1 crore for your client, and if you are able to bargain that 20% on the recovery, you get 20 lakhs of fees. I have seen many balance sheet of a chartered accountants. The gross revenue does not exceed 20 lakhs. Here in one case, you get 20 lakhs fees. So I'm trying to showcase areas that you can look into and practice mediation and conciliation, where you help them to negotiate. So now coming back to insolvency, there is a default that has been done, matter admitted, insolvency professional admitted. Now what is that the insolvency professional has to do? So insolvency professional has to publish in paper within 3 days paper ad stating that this company has been admitted under insolvency code, and he has been appointed as an insolvency professional, and the creditors of this company to file within 14 days their claims against this company. So this opens up another area that you can look into is helping your clients who have to file their claims to insolvency professional in preparing the claim forms and submitting the claim forms. Now, question many times that is raised to me on this point is sir, that is a standard form. Why can't the client fill it? I always say that client can do everything. Can't the client file their returns on their own? Yes, they can file. Why do they come to you? Because they trust you. They know that you are knowledgeable and you can do some value addition. So here, what is that value addition? The value addition is if your client is a MSME client and if he is not registered, get him registered under MSME Act, get the Udyam number taken by the client, and with the form, when you file the Udyam certificate, and you can also claim the interest on the delayed payment that is there as per MSME Act, which in normal circumstances the client would not do where if he is filing on his own, because he will view the ledger balance, he will view the relevant supporting, but he may not be doing the interest calculation as per the MSME Act and filing that in claim. As per the MSME Act, if there is a default and you are filing, recovering the money, you can recover that with interest. So while filing this claim, you can always claim this interest, and RP or insolvency professional who is taking the verifying your claim will always admit that interest also. So this is a value addition that you do, for which the preparation of these forms, you may charge them normally this application claim forms, if you has to be prepared by you for your client, the normally fees that you should charge is not less than 10,000 rupees. Okay, so this is a revenue earning area where not much of your time may be taken, but your advisory will help your client to recover more money than what he would have normally done. So RP files a paper ad where he calls for the claims within 14 days. In case you miss the deadline of 14 days, don't worry, till 90 days, anytime you file the claim, the insolvency professional is bound to look into your claim, accept your claim or reject your claim. So basically he will have, if your claims are not properly filed, if there is a deficiency, he will intimate you. You fulfill, provide the documents that he requires to accept your claims, and your claims will be accepted. So 14 days till that claims are collected, 21st day from the date of announcement, the COC is formed under IBC. So COC is Committee of Creditors. This Committee of Creditors is the key in this process. Committee of Creditor comprises of financial creditor only. Okay. operational creditor can be a part of COC only if the debt of that operational creditor is more than 10% of the total debt of the company. So for example, there is a 100 rupees debt in the balance sheet of the company, and there is an operational creditor whose liability in the balance sheet is 11 rupees. Then yes, he can attend that meeting of COC, but he does not have a right to vote. He only has a right to attend. The right to vote on any of the matters is only with the financial creditor. Another person who can attend the meeting is the financial creditor, the suspended board members. So who are the part of the COC? The OC with 10%, more than 10% debt can attend. Right to vote is with financial creditors, so they are the one who controls the meeting. And suspended directors can attend the COC, but suspended directors only right to attend, no right to vote. Okay. Now, once the 21st day COC is formed and the document is filed with NCLT that following constitutes COC, that COC can also change over a period as soon as the new claims come and there may be a change in constitution. Okay, now what is the role that a chartered accountant can play? A chartered accountant can play a role in the advisory capacity to the COC, in the advisory capacity to the OC, and in the advice can be a part of the insolvency professional team, assisting the insolvency professional in the whole process of insolvency. So here, when you form a COC, you have to call first meeting by 30th day. So for calling the meeting, a notice is to be prepared, agenda is to be prepared, an explanatory statement to the agenda has to be notes to be prepared and circulated to the COC member. These are the things again where a secretarial arm of a chartered accountant can act and come into play and assist the insolvency professional by assisting him in taking over this secretarial work. During the meeting, the chartered accountant can assist in helping to conduct the COC smoothly, can record what is happening in the COC, and at the end of the COC can prepare, assist the RP insolvency professional in preparing the minutes to the COC. These minutes to the COC are very crucial documents for an insolvency professional, because at any point of time, any challenges comes, these are the documents that will be produced. So how to prepare minutes, how to present it in the discussion in the minutes is something we as a chartered accountant are always equipped with, as we have been writing minutes for the companies also, for their board meetings, for their AGM, for their EGMs and all. So this is nothing different from that. So this is another area that you can look into. I have segmented the whole process of IBC and trying to identify at each segment what is the area of practice that we can enter. For minutes and writing and this agenda per meeting, the chartered accountant can charge RP. They can charge on the times that he spends in the COC. For example, if the COC meeting is conducted and it runs for 4 hours, then on 4-hour basis, he can charge them, where he can take the overall cost, and for the other general work, what he can charge additional, and he can raise the bill to the insolvency professional to whom he is assisting. So on 38th day, there is a meeting that is held, a COC, which is a mandatory first meeting. Thereafter, it is the insolvency professional's prerogative when he wants to have a meeting. So there is no timelines like every 10 days you have to have a meeting or every 30 days. If he wants to have a meeting every 5 days, he can have, and if he wants to have a meeting at a month end also, he can have. So now the next meeting that he will have is, which is a mandatory meeting that he will have, is for resolution process. So on the 75th day of the process, the insolvency professional will publish another ad, which will invite. In first ad, he invited creditors to file their claims. Now this is the ad where he will invite other companies or the other anyone who is interested in taking over this company. So here lies a big opportunity, a biggest opportunity in the IBC that is there is M&A work. Here you will have a straight sell companies. In M&A, you have a target companies which the acquire wants to acquire. So here are the targets that you have. Here the company in textile which has gone into insolvency, the RP will come out with an ad on the 75th day. That is a Form G expression of interest that he publishes, which invites that anyone who is interested in taking over this textile unit would can come and file their expression of interest, and if he qualifies the criteria that has been kept, then he can participate in the resolution process. So here a chartered accountant who has a textile client who is looking for either forward integration, backward integration, or expansion can have an opportunity to directly take over this company through insolvency process. So vertical in the firm who can look into this M&A work is always a highly remunerative work, and this area again I say that is a area where a lot of expertise of a chartered accountant will come into play. So here you get a direct target. You just have to find the acquirers. You have, if you have an investors base, if you have a clientele who are looking for expansion, then you just have to search out that, okay, this is the things that your client is looking or your investor is looking, which are the companies available. Showcase that to them. If he's interested in any of the company, follow that company, follow that RP, apply the UI, and enter into a resolution process. Help them, your client or an investor, to prepare a resolution plan and be the one to take over that company with them. Secondly, in this process, you can also be a process advisor to the RP. The RP, as I said, can be anyone. He need not be only a chartered accountant. Sorry. So what needs is the process advisory that he will read, how to run the resolution process. So from the day the publication is made till the final bid is accepted or resolution plan is accepted, how to run that process. So there is something known as preparation of RFRP, that is request for proposal, which is to be prepared, which is like a normal tender document, that how the tender, once any tender comes, they come out with a tender document, that how this process, tender document process will be followed. Same way here, how this resolution process will follow is mentioned in this RFRP. So preparation of this RFRP, there is something known as evaluation matrix. So various plans, various bidders will come out with their various plans. How to evaluate their plan, how to give them the weightage. So that is defined under a evaluation matrix. So helping to form that evaluation matrix, that weightage is to be given to what? Upfront payment, future payment. The weightage is to be given to the same industry people bidding for the company or a different industry people. If you're giving it in cash, what should be the weightage? So that all definition that you need to define, it comes under the document that is known as evaluation matrix, and our chartered accountant can help the RP in preparing this evaluation matrix. Okay, after doing that, the plans will come. Plans are to be weighted. There is a section that came into picture in November 2017, that is section 29A. So when section 29A check needs to be done whether the plan, the applicant who has filed the plan, whether he is eligible and qualifies what the code says. So under section 29A, there are several clauses. You have to verify whether the person who has given the plan qualifies the test of 29A. If he does not qualify, however best plan he may be giving, but it cannot be entertained. So the normally IP also takes does 29A verification outsourced from an expert. So there also a chartered accountant can carry out this section 29A verification and help him to do confirm him whether the applicant is 29A eligible or not eligible. Same way, a plan, the RP is supposed to give a compliance certificate which says that the plan is IBC compliant. So normally IP who may not be a chartered accountant may have not have access to so much knowledge base that we have. In that scenario, whether the plan is compliant, there are certain places where you require to know whether all the laws are compliant, whether the plan is conditional or not. None plan should be unconditional, the court says. So the understanding of all these things, he may require a help of an expert to give that certificate to him, based on which he will certify further to the NCLT. So this assisting the RP in verifying the plan whether it is compliant or not will also area of service that a chartered accountant can look into. Further going into the process, so during this process you have two opportunities. One, from the client side, if you have, you can come as a resolution applicant for your client, prepare the resolution plan and run the sit in the process for your client. Second, you have an opportunity on the RP side where you assist the RP in running this resolution process. Okay, moving further, there is another opportunity on 47 day as a registered valuer. If you are a registered valuer under IBBI, a chartered accountant with 3 years of membership can appear for valuation exam for financial security. So one who has done cleared that exam and is a registered valuer, that chartered accountant, the opportunity for them specifically is the area of practice as a financial valuer in this IBC, where he will be appointed by 47 day in the matter that is admitted. Moving further, once the plans come, the plans are either accepted by COC or rejected by COC. So the acceptance and rejection is done on the negotiation. So you can help your client to appear in the COC and negotiate with the COC on the terms that you want the plan company to be taken over. What is the benefit that you have in taking over of the company through resolution plan? Now, this resolution plan mechanism is such a mechanism that you are interested in buying a company. Okay, presently the balance sheet shows that there is 1,000 crore debts in the company. There are the debt and liabilities, several liabilities. You can carve out. You can say that in your plan that, sir, this company I will take provided the debt is only reduced from 1,000 crores to 30 crores. I again repeat, 1,000 to 30 crores. This is the level of which the negotiation goes. You may be reading in the newspaper that the resolution plan passed, the bankers have taken 90% haircut, 70% haircut. What does that mean? That there was 100 rupees debt in the book, and the party who has offered to take over says that he will only repay 30 rupees of that, and 70% the lenders will have to forego. So it is not only lenders. In this, you have to redraft the whole balance sheet of the company and bring it to a position. So you have to probably deflate the balance sheet from the the balloon balance sheet, where it is not able to control the company. So deflate it, bring it to the realistic position, and that position is what your client should offer for the company and take over the company. And by doing this, you actually get rid of all the past issues of that company. So in the key is a resolution plan. A resolution plan should include each and everything. The smallest of the waiver that you want should be included in the plan. The prayer that you make to the NCLT in your that the NCLT should pass an order, because once the resolution plan is passed, that means you have a court order which allows you to whatever prayer that you seek gets cleared out through NCLT. So this gives you a clean slate company where all the past issues of that company are out, and you are taking actually a clean slate company and running it. Imagine SR to form and the SR at this point of time, it will not take less than 10 years, right? But in less than 3 years, Mittal has taken over the SR. The Ruyas are out, and now Mittals are in SR. This is if the Mittal had planned to put a company of the size of SR, the funds that he would have required, the timelines that he would have required to complete the project would not have been less than 10 years. But he was able to do it within 3 years. One of the biggest case and the longest run case in NCLT. NCLT is a time-bound process. The process needs to be completed as per the code within 180 days. There can be one extension. It can be extended further from 180 to 240. And then in case of the pandemic type of situation, some exclusion needs to be given. It is 330 days. So under all circumstances, 330 days is the outer limit under which the company needs to get resolved. Okay, these days what we talk does not have any holidays, no Sundays, no Saturdays, no public holidays. So from the day the announcement is made of admission is made, within 330 days the process needs to be completed. This is what the law says. On an average, it has been seen as on in this last 3 years that instead of 330, it is going to something around 410 to 420 days in most of the cases. The time lag that of the this extra that is gone is not due to the process, but it was to judiciary. The time that judiciary takes to hear and close the matter is the time because of which this has gone extended. But understand that before this law came, the recovery, if anyone wants to wind up the company or if anyone wants to recover the money, the timelines that India had was around 4 years. Now, from 4 years, it has come down to 410 days. That is 1 year and 3 months max. Within 15 months, from 48 months to 15 months is what actually the data shows. Because of this law, the recovery has happened. So as a chartered accountant, we can play a big role in this whole process. Moving further, that after a resolution plan is passed, what is that things needs to be done? Once the resolution plan is passed by the COC, it will be put to NCLT. Again, you have a right to represent and you can appear for your client in NCLT in representing the plan. And once the NCLT plan passes the plan, then taking over the handover process that you have to take from RP for your the company from RP to your client is also a process where chartered accountant services can be offered, because taking over is a exercise where a lot of documentation will be required to be made. What you are taking over, how the handover is done by the RP will be very crucial, because once the takeover is completed, then in whatever is the past thing, if anywhere you require that data and you have not taken over, then you may not get anyone to answer your questions. So handover is a very crucial part of this process, and that's why the things has to be looked into in that sector. So a chartered accountant can also enter into this area of practice where he can assist the client to in the takeover process and see how the handover can be taken, smooth handover can be taken from the resolution professional. Now, apart from these practices, what are the areas that a chartered accountant can look into is most of this company which goes into insolvency are the companies where there is a non-compliance of past. And as a RP takes over, he is duty bound to do all the compliances. So a chartered accountant can help the RP in getting all the compliances done of the company, whether past or present. Present, certainly he has to do, but even if of the past, he has to see that the company gets completely compliant under all the laws. So chartered accountant can offer this area compliance practice to his compliance services to the RP resolution professional who is working and get the company compliant with the laws. Apart from it, what is another area that which is a big area which is normally discussed and opportunity that lies for a chartered accountant. So apart from it, under the law of IBC, there is something known as avoidance transaction. So there are 4 types of avoidance transactions which are mentioned in the insolvency and bankruptcy code. What are these 4 types of transactions, and how does a chartered accountant come into play? So RP, insolvency professional, has to form an opinion whether there is an avoidance transaction in the company that he has taken over. To form this opinion, he will require a transaction audit to be done. A transaction audit is a similar part of a forensic audit, you can say, where 4 types of avoidance transaction, 4 types of transactions which are mentioned in the code needs to be identified from the books of accounts, and if they are found, that type of transactions are found, then they are to be reported to NCLT. So what are that 4 types of transaction? So first transaction that is mentioned in the code is preferential transaction. What is a preferential transaction? Preferential transaction is a transaction whereby a preference to one creditor is given over the another creditor. Now, what do you mean by that? And how do you identify? So I will give you a small instance on it. Okay. So a preferential transaction, you take any balance sheet of your client. Okay. There will be loan from director in the books of accounts. Okay, so when you take a loan account of a director, there will be loan taken and loan repaid during the year to the directors. Okay, the same client has also bank loans. You take the bank loan agreement or the sanction letter of the client. There will be one clause in the bank loan agreement that says that you cannot repay any other loans before repaying this loan. This is a standard clause which is there in all bank agreement, and this is the standard practice that this is never actually put to use. So what does it mean? The director loan, taking of director loan is not restrictive, but repayment of director loan is restrictive. You cannot repay the loan taken from anyone, whether it is director or anyone, before the loan of the bank is repaid. So when you have repaid that director loan, you have given a preference to that director over bank. So in the this transaction is to be reported under preferential transaction. Similarly, there may be other transaction. I am just given you one instance. Another instance can be there are 2 creditors in the books of accounts. Both where the due dates were coming, for example, 30th of April. But you prefer to pay one person because he was highly litigative and he can create a lot of pressure for you, and you did not pay another whose due date was 30th. So in that case, you have actually preferred one client, one creditor over another in that scenario. So they also come under this preferential transaction. So this is one transaction that has to be identified. Chartered accountant is normally appointed to identify this transaction, this type of transaction that have taken place in past 2 years. Okay. Second type of transaction is the undervalued transaction. Undervalued transaction itself, what you undervalued word means is the transaction that has been entered at a much lower value is an undervalued transaction. So the chartered accountant who has been given this assignment, he has to identify whether there is any sale or any transaction entered by the corporate debtor at a value much less than what it should have been. Then he has to report it under the undervalued transaction. Third transaction is a fraudulent transaction. The word fraudulent itself means that any transaction that the corporate debtor has entered with the intention to defraud the creditors is a fraudulent transaction. So when the transaction auditor is appointed, he has to see that any transaction has been entered to defraud any of the creditors, then he will have to identify that transaction under fraudulent transaction. And fourth is exorbitant transaction. So extortion value, the overvalued transaction. a transaction which has been entered at a high value. It's just an antithesis of a undervalued transaction. So these four types of transactions he has to identify. Apart from identifying, he has to quantify. Okay, so there is a transaction X that has been done on so and so date, valuing so and so rupees is what the transaction auditor report should come out with. This report has to be completely clear report. It cannot be a qualified reports that it subject to so and so, subject to something or any condition or a thing. Either four transactions are there or not there. If there, then what is the value of that has to be done by the transaction auditor. So this is a big area where most of the time any company that goes into IBC will certainly try do this audit for sure. So almost all companies which go into IBC, this audit is to be done. And this is a big opportunity for a chartered accountant to do, because this is a routine work. Basically, you can say it's an audit work only that you have to do, but you have to identify these certain transactions. If there is a fraud, or if the RP feels that the company has manipulated the books in past and he wants to do a detailed forensic audit, then also that is another area that it can be looked into, and that the chartered accountant can assist the RP in doing the forensic audit and reporting the forensic audit. Forensic audit is much wider audit than the transaction audit. Transaction audit is aimed to identify only this four set of transaction. So if you are doing a transaction audit, don't go into much detail of other things. Put your focus on these transactions and bring it out. If you identify and you feel that while doing this transaction audit, what things in forensic needs to be done, guide the RP that these are the things that has come to your knowledge while doing the forensic a transaction audit, and in view of which it is advisable for the RP insolvency professional to get the forensic audit done. So then it will be the call of the insolvency professional to do that forensic audit. So the scope of work under forensic is much larger than the scope of work under transaction audit. Am I clear? Am I able to convey the things to you all on these things?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you, Pankaj.
Yes,
So,
sir.
yeah. So, moving further, anyone has any point or any question that they would like to raise at this point of time before I go ahead on the things? Yes. Am I able to convey, sir? Look, in this virtual session, the advantage is that a speaker can go on speaking and speaking, and disadvantage for the speaker is that he doesn't come to know whether he is able to reach his audience or not. Had it been a physical lecture, then through eye contact, through body language, normally it is understood. So here, if you can help me to understand whether I have been able to reach to you, it would be great. Do you have any questions in understanding the process that I have explained till now? Or you have any query on insolvency, then kindly raise it. I can just share before I move ahead on my later part of the liquidation also.
Any questions from the members, please? It would be very helpful for respected speaker to understand the seriousness about the involvement of all the members.
अरे पंकज इतना सीरियस मत हो जा यार, तू ऐसा मत बोल. I just for understanding purpose thing. If you want some clarification, if you feel that in this process of insolvency, anyone would like to understand certain things, because what I have been telling you during this session is the key pointers. So someone who may have some interest in any of the key points that I have said and would like to go for detailing of it, then I may take that detailing before I proceed further on my session. That's all. Nahi? Okay, I move further then. I will give you one more chance. So kindly, anyone has any point, can raise at later stage also, no issue. We move further on the process. So as I said, the representation opportunity, big opportunity, resolution plan preparation and identifying and helping them, big opportunity, running the resolution process, big opportunity, assisting in secretarial work, big opportunity. Yes, I got one question, I think, but the question is also a very big question. So yes, I will take this question also. What will be the impact of Anil Ambani case? So impact on Anil Ambani's case on what? On the stock market prices, on Anil Ambani, on us, on whom you want to understand? On insolvency professional, on chartered accountants, on economy, on stock market. This question is a very open question. So impact of that case on whom you would like to understand? Then I will assume that okay, on us for professional opportunity under IBC. Okay, so during this start of IBC, have you ever anyone thought I would also like to own a company like Ambani, or own a company or take over a company from Ambani? No, right? When you thought in the old days, taking over the company from Ruiyas, the empire of the Ruiyas, was not possible. So when I take my IBC sessions for the IPs, I always say that now you have all the opportunities to be one who is in charge of a company of Ambani's. May not be Mukesh Bhai, but Anil Bhai for sure. You can be a RP in the case of Ambani's. And when you become a RP, you actually take over the management of Ambani's and you are the one who run that show. So as a RP, the biggest opportunity is that dream coming true to take over the management of Ambani and run the show of Ambani's can come true if you become a RP and you are selected as a RP in any of the companies of Ambani, specifically Anil Ambani Group, because Mukesh Bhai is far away from it. So Anil Ambani, you can always look into it. Yeah, I will take the things. I'm coming to that now. When I've picked up the trail, I will come from that. So I am talking on the opportunities. So Anil Ambani Group's company, which has gone into trouble, which have gone into NCLT, that is an opportunity for us as a chartered accountant in identifying the buyers for that company. There are certain companies of Anil Ambani Group which are not yet entered into IBC. Okay, where the restructuring is being proposed, restructuring work is being on. In case restructuring phase, the company will come into IBC that time also. The opportunity may be there for a chartered accountant in identifying the buy side of that companies. That is the key opportunity that you can that one can see from the Ambani Group companies that is coming into NCLT. Now, pending case of Ambani, what I feel and I understand, Sumal ji, is that you are talking of a case of a personal guarantee of Anil Ambani, probably. That is what you are referring to, not on the company side. Am I correct? You can unmute yourself and actually on this point so that I actually talk on the specific point that you want a clarification. Sonal ji?
No, I wanted to ask you that the pending matters which are in IBC,
yeah.
Once the Supreme Court judgment of Anil Ambani came, what will be the chances of personal insolvency levied by the banks and other creditors for personal guarantor? That was my question.
Yeah, so that is what I said. You wanted to clarification on the personal guarantee. So personal guarantees are in full flow now. I myself have given consent to act as an insolvency professional for a case of personal guarantee where the banks are have filed a case against the promoter. Okay, so the personal guarantee can be evoked because now it is very clear after that judgment, and it can be evoked, and the recovery can be made of the against from the personal guarantor for the haircut that the bank has taken from the CRP process. So there is now no issue, and the things are clear. Am I able to convey the things correctly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. So coming back to the subject, in the opportunity in this personal guarantee, again, there will be a lot of areas of practice for a chartered accountant and lot of challenges for a chartered accountant. Let me, before talk on the opportunities, certain challenges that chartered accountants are facing and may face in times to come because of this insolvency code. I will just try and point out 2 or 3 issues that I have seen over where a challenge for a practicing chartered accountant will come. For example, you are an auditor of a company, you have audited the books of accounts, and that company has gone into insolvency. Okay, for whatsoever reason, the party defaulted, matter admitted, and RP is appointed. And RP may be like our like a Rahul Dravid or the late Jaitley Sir, Arun Jaitley ji, who had a liking for a profession of a CA, but they never had a guts to do it, or they actually failed in their exercise to do a CA. And but they became a different professional, and now they have become a IP also. So they have a grudge toward our profession because they could not become a CA. So now when they become a IP, they have a grudge on this thing, and they try to come out their frustration on our professionals, a chartered professional. So 1 or 2 things that I have come across is one specific point: when you do the audits, there is an audit report that you issue. You mentioned that you have audited, you have verified and checked all the books of accounts, and the proper books of accounts have been maintained. And in small companies, private limited, closely held companies, what many a times is seen is that the books of accounts, when you say as per Companies Act, the books of account includes your statutory registers, ROC registers, your minutes book and all. But many a times these are never complied with. They are never made also in many of the cases. So when the RP is appointed and when he seeks this data from the management says he does not have, then he goes back to the auditor seeking this data. And auditor says that they have verified and it was in place. And to the contrary, the management gives the statement that they have never made this book. Now, this goes against the chartered accountant, and if the complaint is filed, it will be a gross negligence complaint that may come, and that may create a trouble for the chartered accountant. Our code of ethics will disciplinary action can be taken against the chartered accountant in this type of complaints. And believe me, this type of complaints have been filed by certain RPs who I feel had a grudge with the chartered accountant. May not be a personal grudge with the chartered accountant, but the chartered accountant profession as a whole, because they never were not able to qualify as a chartered accountant, left it half away or so. So as a chartered accountant, the challenge lies is now when your audits are going to be questioned, when your working as an auditor is going to be questioned, your working papers, what you have kept with you, if they are not in line with your audit, the audit documentation is not complete, and company goes into IBC, then there is a huge challenge for a chartered accountant who has done the audit. Okay, there is a company where we were there and appointed as RP. In that company was closed since last 4 years. Okay, and the stock balance continued top 10 crores since 4 years. Now, how does that happen? When we took over, there was no stock. So actually, yes, there was no stock, but the auditor has been auditing and signing the balance sheet without actually verifying the stock. He gave us a management state representation that the stock has been verified by the management. Now, this all are issues where our code of ethics is very clear, where a disciplinary action against us, if we have done this type of things, can take place. So relook into your audits when you are doing this year, that you don't leave these things unturned. The code of ethics that has been recently revised also. My request and humble request to all of you is kindly go through it. Time down the line, we are really going to be a challenging for a practicing chartered accountants, where all types of questions or fingers can be pointed. In good faith, we may be doing certain things, but if the code of ethics does not allow, I would request each and every one of you who is hearing me today to see that the code of ethics in the true spirit be followed and done, because down the line this will create lot of nuisance value for the one who signs the balance sheet. So in IBC, apart from opportunity, this is a red flag, a challenging challenge that almost all SMPs will have, where they are doing the audit. Kindly redo your exercise of auditing, even in case of a SMP or a small or a companies or a closely held companies. Kindly do not rely on the various things on the management representation, where you are supposed to your opinion and your expert views are required. Coming back to the opportunity side under IBC, the first process I explained you, from the default till resolution, is termed as a CIRP process, that is corporate insolvency resolution process. Okay. In case a resolution plan, no resolution plan comes, resolution plan which comes as either not acceptable to the COC and is rejected by COC, or is rejected by NCLT, the company will go into liquidation. That is winding up. What you used to have under Companies Act, now under Companies Act, winding up provisions are not there. It will come straight away to the liquidation into IBC, and it will be a liquidation process that needs to be followed. Let us understand few things of liquidation, three important things on liquidation. So what is liquidation? Under CRP, the company keeps on running, the management is suspended, moratorium applies. Moratorium means no cases against the company can be filed during that period, and RP takes the charge of the company. And he tries to run the company, he tries to bring the resolution on the company and sort the issues. In case nothing is sorted out at the end of 180 days or at the most 330 days, the company, if no resolution plan is passed, the company goes into liquidation. Now, what do you mean by liquidation? In liquidation, the liquidator is appointed. And who can be a liquidator? An insolvency professional registered with IBBI can only be a liquidator. Yes, someone wants to say something? Yes, Punitji? Punitji, you want to say something? Okay. So in liquidation, a liquidator can be is appointed. Liquidator has to maintain the liquidation books of accounts. So there is a list of books of accounts that a liquidator has to maintain. Area of opportunity is the list of books what has to be maintained, assisting the liquidator in preparing that books of accounts. Second, the liquidator has to make a receipt and payments register, which has to be audited by the chartered accountant. So opportunity on receipt and payment. The one who has done the statutory audit of the company in CRP or before cannot do the receipt and payment audit of a liquidation. So they have to be two different auditors. one who had done the CRP period work, and one who is doing receipt payment audit in liquidation. Okay. Moving further, in liquidation, what is the other things that you have? In liquidation, the company can be sold as a going concern. So if you have missed the bus of CRP in the resolution, you have not been able to buy the company. In liquidation, if the company is a running company and the order comes with a option that the RP can sell this the liquidator can sell this company as in a liquidation in going concern, then there is an opportunity for you to buy it out for your client or an investor, the company as a going concern in liquidation. Another opportunity is under Section 230 of Companies Act that comes into during the liquidation. So once the order is published and for liquidation, there can be a Section 230 application made to the NCLT, and the under Section 230, the compromise and can be done, and the company can be made alive again. Here also under Section 230 or liquidation under 29A, liquidation under as a going concern, one needs to be the liquidator has to see that the one who is taking over the company is 29A compliant. So one who was not qualified under 29A during CRP cannot qualify even during the liquidation. So the two major opportunities here. Again, third, again here also in liquidation, when the liquidation order is pronounced, within 5 days, the liquidator will publish in the paper the ad stating that
Sir, you're on mute.
anyone has any claim against this company to file the claims. So same way what you had a claims in CRP, again you have to have a claims in liquidation. So in liquidation, the claims are to be again filed, and that claims has to be looked into. In both the places, you can also offer a service to the of a verification of claim, assisting the RP and here in liquidator in collating and verifying the claims and helping him in confirming the claims. Once the liquidator, the claims has in liquidation has to be collected within 30 days, whereas in CRP it was 90 days. So here, once the claims are collected, the liquidator will make a asset pool. So basically, so he will segregate asset and liabilities. Out of the assets that are he segregates, the asset pool that he creates, he will start selling the asset and recovering the money against the asset, and that money he has to pay off to the creditors. Here comes the major change of IBC, and that was there in past. Whenever any attachment from government was there, whenever that asset is sold which had a government attachment, the whatever was realized was first adjusted towards government dues and balance was available. Here in IBC, government ranks 5th in the chart. So first, whatever is realized by sale of asset will be used to pay off the CRP cost or liquidation cost. If anything remains, then it will go down to the next step, and it will be paid to the to the secured creditors and the 24 months workman dues. If still there is money left from the asset that are sold, then it will go to the third step. The third step will be employees 12 months due. Then it will go to the fourth step, that is unsecured creditors. Then it will go to the fifth step, that is the government dues. So this is a piecemeal distribution what we used to study during our during our CA academy in our CA studies. So it will be paid in piecemeal. As you realize, you pay the first step. Unless the first step is exhausted, you don't go to second step. If the assets are sold and it gets exhausted in first and second step, the steps below that will not get anything. So this is how in liquidation process, the assets which are realized will be distributed amongst the various stakeholders, various claimants who are there. After government dues, it will be again the unsecured component of the people of the secured creditors who had non-relinquished that rights and taken asset outside liquidation. For their unsatisfied portion, they rank with the government dues. Thereafter, preferential. Thereafter, equity stakeholder. Now, question sometimes is raised that how can the equity stakeholder be getting anything? So here in insolvency, it is not that it is a liquidity that is the issue. The default at that point of time happened, and at that time company did not have a liquidity, and that's why it went into liquidation. But there may be a asset which may be a illiquid asset, but a valuable asset. If that asset is sold, all the liabilities can be paid and money still can be retained. In that type of scenario, the liquid equity shareholders will get a chance to do the money. But in most of the cases, it will not go till equity is too far. It will finish off in first and second step itself only. CRP cost and liquidation cost will be paid in full, and at the most, secure creditors and workman dues will be paid in part. That's all. The below this in liquidation till now, I don't think in any company it would have fallen. So in liquidation, most of the time, all the other stakeholders are not going to get anything because asset value may not be there to pay all the people out. Now, there is one more area that needs to be discussed is voluntary winding up. This is a liquidation process where CRP is done, and after CRP liquidation is done, where there is a default. Now there is a company which is viable, which is running, which has a cash balance, and it has a it has a capacity to pay off all its liability. They want to close the business and close off the company. Then how do you do that? So that can go under voluntary liquidation method. Here also a voluntary liquidation process has to be followed. But here in previously voluntary winding up can be done through High Court. Now, if you want to go for voluntary liquidation, you have to appoint an insolvency professional as a liquidator, and he will take over the charge and he will do the voluntary liquidation process. So board meeting to be called first in the company to pass a resolution for the voluntary liquidation and propose a name of a liquidator. Then the EGM to be called, and EGM the same thing to be passed. And after the resolution is passed in the EGM, appointing a liquidator to take a charge in this case, and liquidator to take the control of the thing, open in liquidation account with the bank, pay, take the charge of asset, sell off the asset, take the money, pay off all the liabilities. After paying off liabilities, if anything is that, pay off to the equity shareholder, pay the dividend, and thereafter he has to go to NCLT and file an application of a closure of a company, stating that this is the process he has followed as envisaged under the code, and the voluntary winding up is done. So a chartered accountant can assist the clients who wants to close down their company, where there is no issue as far as the liquidity is concerned or the company closure is concerned. Here in voluntary liquidation, the directors of the company has to give a solvency certificate, affidavit of a solvency certificate, that in case that the company is solvent, and in case there is a shortfall at any point of time in paying off any of the liabilities, then and the company doesn't have that money, then the directors will be liable to bring that money and pay off that liabilities. So this is in short on the liquidation aspect and the voluntary liquidation aspect of the IBC. Coming to the personal guarantor aspect of the IBC, the personal guarantors, in India, what had been happening was in past was whenever you used to take a loan, the banker used to take a personal guarantee, and there was no law with a stringent, or there was no action. Let us say that there was no action in past where was taken strongly against the personal guarantees that the bankers have taken. So the people had no fright, and they were offering their personal guarantees on for all the loans that they had taken. Now, with this IBC coming and personal guarantee coming in place, the challenge is that now these all personal guarantors, the companies who have defaulted in CRP, heavy haircut has been taken. And now when it is coming to personal guarantees evoking, and now when Supreme Court has given a direction that yes, that can be done, and you can go ahead with the personal guarantee filing, the challenge lies with the personal guarantors where they have a asset. Because what will happen is the insolvency professional will be appointed, a chance will be given to file a resolution plan again by the same personal guarantor. In CRP, the invitation is given to third parties to take over the company. Here, it is a personal assets of the person, individual. So here, there is no opportunity given to come out with a resolution plan from third party. The person who has given a personal guarantee and his personal guarantee is evoked, he himself will have to come out with a plan. So he, in consultation with the insolvency professional who is appointed, will prepare a resolution plan, and that resolution plan, if accepted by COC, it will sail through. In case it is not accepted by the COC, the process of resolution in this individual insolvency will fail. In the corporate resolution process, failure of CRP directly leads to liquidation. Here in personal guarantor, it is not so. If that process fails of resolution, then there is a process that needs to be followed in case if you want to take the individual to the bankruptcy. So here you would say liquidation. In personal guarantee, use personal individual insolvency, you say bankruptcy. So a person will be, then the lender will have to file the application under bankruptcy that they have tried to resolve the personal guarantee, but resolution has not taken place. And now they would like to file the bankruptcy application against that individual. So bankruptcy application, when it is filed, again the person, the RP will be appointed. That is a bankruptcy trustee. That is what he's named as, and he will take the charge of the assets of the individual, pay off the liabilities against that again in the same model, and complete the bankruptcy process. So this is about the individual bankruptcy that is there. Now in this, there is a lot of opportunity that may lie in advising this personal guarantor into this process. How does the individual bankruptcy thing takes place, and how can he ring fence himself, or what are the safeguards that he has? You can have an advisory on these lines. The another new area of practice which I would like to say is a pre-packs that have been recently announced. So pre-pack is nothing but a restructuring model that in old days we have a restructuring proposals that we used to send to the banks for the clients. Here the similar thing in the model of a pre-packs will have. In restructuring proposals, bank used to accept the proposal, and it used to get a sanction of the authorities from the bank and sail through. The issue many times they had to the bankers had in getting the proposal through was CVC. So if they are taking a heavy haircut in restructuring, they were afraid that CVC will question them. Now to avoid that, this pre-packs have come into play. Here also the resolution plan is nothing but a restructuring plan is to be proposed to the COC, that is the bankers again, and the bankers, if they approve it with 66% of the things, it goes to NCLT. So here, instead of the plan which used to get restructuring plan which used to get a confirmation from the bank in-house authority, here it goes to the NCLT, that is a judicial process, and you get a confirmation of that plan in way of pre-pack resolutions through a NCLT. So a CVC, the issue which used to be there, gets countered with. The banker will be able to take a decision without the fear of CVC under pre-packs. So advisory under pre-packs for MSME, which has been recently allowed, it opens up a Pandora of opportunities for a chartered accountant for their MSME clients. So these are the key things on IBC. I tried to cover CRP, liquidation, voluntary liquidation, and pre-pack, and the opportunities thereunder under this section things. Now I think it's 12:20. We can have a question and answer floor. If anyone wants a Q&A on this, then I can take up the Q&A on it. Anyone?
Any question from the members, please? Thank you, sir. Everyone has understood everything, sir.
I hope so, because two things, silence gives to the speaker, it means two things. Either everything is completely understood, or second option is everything has gone bouncer. But I feel that I will take the first one, that everyone has understood everything to my side, and take it ahead. So any specific question on insolvency or any doubts other than what we have discussed on insolvency, then we can take that doubts and discuss it out.
So, how much time it takes generally to set up practice properly in insolvency? Suppose.
Pankaj, good question. So insolvency, now let me tell you what is insolvency practice all about. If you want to start your practice, like since 2017, I have entered into this practice. I have not generated my UDN. That means I have not done any certification work as a chartered accountant practicing. You can have a COP and also do this practice, but this requires a full-time devotion. So if you want to understand how much time it is, how much time you would like to devote to this practice, it cannot be done as an insolvency professional. You cannot do part-time practice. What today we discussed is the other side. As a chartered accountant, if I want to start a advisory side of the insolvency practice, then in my view, 2 to 3 years of time to set up your advisory practice, to set up your niche or your say in this area, because you will have to then have either you are looking from the investor side or a client side. Then how do you go about on that side? If you are looking from the RP side, advising the RP and assisting the RP, then creating your network with the RPs. So that's how, but 2 to 3 years, I feel the minimum will be required, whether you do on the advisory side or whether you come as a IP and you want to start your practice as a insolvency professional. Because in this 3 years as a IP, you need to set up your team, you need to market yourself and get the business, you need to complete the assignments and pitch for the new assignment. So you require minimum 3 years to set up yourself in this practice. Yes.
So,
Thanks, Ramesh ji. So
any more questions, please, from the members? Please feel free to ask any questions.
okay. So if no one wants to ask, then I will share one more thing to you all. Like now, this is something related to our routine practice as a chartered accountant. But a caution note: when you are an auditor of a company and the company has gone into insolvency, and the RP approaches you, that you continue the audit of the further year. While drafting the audit report of that company which is into insolvency, you need to be very sure. Don't just go ahead with your old drafts. You will have to create a draft of your own. You will have to put your carve outs. You will have to put your qualifications very clearly in the companies which has gone into insolvency. Now let us understand that there is a company which has gone into insolvency. The previous auditor was not ready to continue, and you have been approached to take over the assignment from the of that and do the audit. Okay, in that given scenario, if you have to do, and if RP is not able to provide you all the data for the audit, then you can go and issue disclaimer of opinion also. So do not restrict yourself in issuing a qualified report only if the data is not made available to you, because in most of the cases, the issue that lies is the RP does not, the old management is not cooperating. All the data, that the audit that he wants you to complete is of the old period where he was not there, he or she was not there, and he or she, if he was, they were not there, they cannot confirm on the transactions that has been showcased to you, and because of which you at sometimes when you want to issue a report, you are into doldrum that how do I qualify and to what extent I qualify. So where you feel that you are not able to form opinion because of the lack of data or lack of evidences, you can go to the extent of issuing a disclaimer of opinion in your report. What happens is, while giving disclaimer, you are safeguarding yourself. RP, by taking your disclaimer into consideration, he is safeguarding himself. As far as compliance is concerned, he has done the compliance. Okay, now the thing comes that if this disclaimer is to be considered, then why it is the need to give a report only. So don't get into all this tangent. See how you safeguard yourself. The company, if you are an auditor, has gone into insolvency and you feel that there are some issues in the last balance sheet that you have signed, okay, and that has come to a light now. Try to resolve this in the new balance sheet that you will be signing now when the RP is there. Try to cover it by way of your notes and put it across. I will share in one, as I said in one of the case, there was 10 crore stock coming. I requested the auditor to continue, and I say that in past you would have seen, you write, cover this, that in this time you have not seen. And you are qualifying to the extent of stock that has been shown in the books of accounts. So at any point of time, anyone questions, you can at least say that last year tha, ye saal nahi hai. Now, what has happened is not known to you. So try and ring fence yourself wherever possible as a chartered accountant, so that you don't fall in trouble. Try to disassociate as far as possible in this type of stress companies. And when you are issuing report, be very vocal in what you are writing. Because if you try to support the client in your audit reports, the client may not be able to support you in case of your disciplinary action. I repeat, because the times are bad for us and everyone is just trying to wait to poke a finger at or point a finger at us in these coming days. Try to avoid these things and take care in this type of stressful companies where you are auditing, the companies which are stressed where you are auditing. Do follow the guidelines thoroughly and do prepare your audit reports properly with proper documentation. Yeah. Thank you. With this, I think I end my session, and over to you, Pankaj, for the things. I thank you for all the participants for joining and hearing me out throughout the session. Hope I have been able to convey and share my points to you clearly. In case in future, anytime, anything with insolvency, you have any doubts, you can feel back call on me and clear your doubts. With this, I hand over the session to Pankaj.
So thank you, sir, for the very informative session, and I hope all the members would be benefited with all the knowledge shared by respected sirs. So I would like to invite CA Ramesh Sishodia, sir. So are you there?
Yes, Pankaj.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for connecting me to Snehal, sir, for this today's VCS. I would request you to offer vote of thanks to Snehal, sir, please.
Thanks, Snehal sir, for great information to our study circle. And एक वन थिंग कि इन बिटवीन आपने बोला कि बैलेंस शीट का एक 20 लाख रुपया ही होता है चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट में, तो मेरे को भी लगा कि ये प्रैक्टिस में आना चाहिए, 20 का वन शॉट में 20 का 40 होना चाहिए। थैंक्स सर, थैंक्स फॉर चेंबूर स्टडी सर्कल की तरफ से वेरी वेरी थैंक यू सर।
Thank you all.
Yes, sir. Thank you, CA Ramesh Sisodiya, for your kind words. With this, I would like to offer thanks from Chembur Study Circle to Snehal sir once again. Thank you, sir. We hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Pankaj. We can look forward for the future session.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir. Take care. Take care, everyone. Bye, sir.